I just want downtime. I want self-care. What I tend to do, and I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this do, is reach for the phone.
We could definitely go into like mechanisms of like internet addiction, social media addiction, gaming addiction, like all these
Dopamine and all
dopamine
that.
hits. But at the end of the day, it's just easy. It's easy. That's why. And this is where I would say that self-care has become selfish because it's lacked intentional responsibility.
I think you introduced me to a new drink here.
I did. This is kombucha.
I think it's raspberry.
Yes, black raspberry.
Black raspberry.
Yeah.
I think that's my first time
It's
taking black raspberry kombucha.
it's pretty good. I like it.
All right.
Soothes the soul.
Yeah. Speaking of kombucha, this is self-care right here. Yeah. Today's topic, self-care. I want to play a little game of Have You Ever?
Okay, let's do it.
I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was wondering, have you ever had a pedicure?
Yes,
You have?
I have.
How was it?
I loved it.
Same.
Yeah, no, and it's funny that you asked it. I'm trying to remember when. I think it was. I had to pause for a moment because I had to think. Wait, pedi or mani, and like.
Yeah, mani-pedi?
Yeah, and
Did
like,
you have the mani-pedi?
I no, I just had the pedi, and like, and if I remember, yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, this was when. I think it's when my wife, like, just before my wife and I got married. I think my wife was going to get hers done, and it was either her or my mother-in-law that asked me, "Hey, do you want to get a pedicure?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." Like, not no, because they were all adamant about like it feels great. Like I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure."
Yeah.
And literally, I've never had someone touch my feet that way before, and it was highly enjoyable.
Was it your one and only?
Yeah, I haven't gone back. Honestly,
Yeah.
I don't know why I haven't gone back again to do it, but it honestly felt really good.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is nice.
Yes.
Like it's kind of, and I don't want to. I've definitely had more massages than I have pedicures, but it's also like one of those things that I forget that I enjoy so much. I'm like, wow, this is really nice. I feel really good after doing this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. No, I had a similar experience.
Okay.
But it was with my wife.
Mhm.
And I think it was when we were dating. And I think she was going to go, she went to get it done with her mom. And she was like, have you ever had a pedi? I was like, no. She's like, dude, you're missing out. So we went. The wonderful, it was a classic, wonderful, like Vietnamese ladies. And they were just great. It was amazing. Just so relaxing. And yeah, I just never knew that level of cleansing and attention to one's feet could produce such a therapeutic, like you feel so good walking out. So, gentlemen, if you haven't had a pedi,
walking on sunshine.
Yeah, next time your wife goes, just like hop along. Next time your girl goes, just hop along. So I say that because, when you think of self-care these days, that's one of the things that comes up.
Sure.
Cleanses, mani-pedi, massage, spa day.
This is true.
And I guess there's something to be said about that, just like judging by how much we both enjoy.
Yeah. I know. I would say so. I don't think that's untrue at all. I think, and so maybe we would need to define like, okay, like what is self-care?
Exactly.
Right. Like, so in which context are we talking about it here? And so I'm curious. What do you think when you think of self-care? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, so I think of the massages, the pedis,
Sure.
the mani-pedis. But I think self-care goes much deeper than that.
Okay.
And I think there's also ideas that we have of self-care that in many ways are not self-care. So there's ways that we approach self-care that turn out to not be caring. Most of the time when
Caring towards who?
to ourselves
Okay.
and to others, right?
Okay.
And it also okay, so that was a good question because it because it brings up the other question of what is the purpose of self-care
Yes.
in the first place, because that might even help us define self-care. Like why self-care?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think ultimately, and I think arguably, again, as with so many things, I'm gonna come at this from an angle of like a Judeo-Christian perspective.
Mm,
And I'm sure that this isn't the only perspective that adopts this notion, but I would say that really you want to take care of yourself so that your ability to be able to be there for other people is greater, right? Life is not just about you. And ultimately, your ability to be a better human being, a better person, a better version of yourself, however you want to say it, that should increase. And it just so happens that taking care of yourself is necessary to be able to do that. And so obviously, like it feels good, right? It feels good.
yeah.
But I would say that the purpose ultimately, like why we want to try to pursue that is so that our impact cannot suck.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just taking time for myself.
Yes. Like now again, I think if it's taking time for myself, it's insofar as it increases my ability to then provide time for other people,
Mm,
right? Or whether that's like we could get into the introvert extrovert conversation around like, okay, well, some
mhm.
people recharge by like having more time with other people. Some people recharge by having less time with other people. And so I would say that whatever that is, like taking care of yourself in that way, ultimately would be for the purpose of being able to recalibrate and then return back towards giving.
Okay, so you said some words there that I want to kind of stay on.
Yeah.
Recharge,
Mm.
recalibrate, so
Mm.
one can return.
And there's one more word, recreate,
Recreate.
or the common word that we might use for this is recreation.
Okay, I see what you're doing. Yeah.
Right.
Recreation. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So I think in some when I think of self-care, I think in many ways like we're talking about a form of recreation or recreating, which again that word recreation has its roots in that meaning and purpose.
It all sounds great, but oftentimes when I'm done with a long day of work, engaging in a very tedious or maybe mentally stimulating activity, and I just want downtime. I want self-care. What I tend to do and what I'm guessing a lot of people listening to this do is reach for the phone,
Mm.
because it honestly at the beginning it feels great where you suddenly have time to yourself. Like maybe it's maybe you're not engaging with your work coworkers, maybe it's your spouse or your kids, they're gone to bed. You're like, "Ah, finally time to myself." So you grab the phone or you turn on the TV, and that initial feeling is like it's almost like a sigh of relief. But then, of course, what ensues is what we usually refer to as the doom scroll. And you're on Instagram way longer than you wanted to. And I rarely come out of that feeling, man, I just feel so recharged, recreated. Like, man, I feel so good. Rarely come out of it
said
feeling that way.
said no one ever.
Right. But I still have that desire when I'm and so and we could some people could refer to like video games, or there are many things like that where it's like we want to go to it as a form of self-care, but if we think about the definition, it doesn't usually lead to recharge, it doesn't usually lead to rejuvenation and refreshment. So I'm like, yeah, what is that? Why do we do that?
So is that a question?
Yeah, well, I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Well, so I think we do that because it's in many ways like an instant sugar. It's easy. I think
Mm,
ultimately that'd be the simplest form.
yeah,
One thing that really bugs me is how much we overcomplicate reasons for things in an everyday scenario, and obviously including in therapy. Like therapists are like known for doing this. Like we'll read into reasons of why, and sometimes I don't think there's any other more simple or basic or true reason other than it's easy,
mm,
because it's easy,
it's easy. Yeah.
right? And
Mm,
I would argue that obviously the folks that have app developers in general, social media platform designers, right? Creators of the iPhone, Steve Jobs, good job.
hmm.
Right? Like all of these pieces were designed so that it makes it harder to put it down. I mean, because that's a good idea. You want to make it difficult to put it down,
We want to make it easy
to keep it, to
to
hold
keep
on
it.
to it.
Yeah.
And so I mean, we could definitely go into like sure mechanisms of like
Yeah.
internet addiction, social media addiction, gaming
Right.
addiction, like all these
Dopamine and all
dopamine
that.
hits. And but at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's just easy.
Hmm.
It's easy.
Hmm.
That's why.
Mm.
And I would say for the most pragmatic example, because you could read so many different PubMed research studies, listen to so many different podcasts to determine, well, why do I do this? Why do I do that? But at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is it's easy. It just
Hmm.
is.
Yeah.
It's way easier than making effort towards something else.
And that's so that's the other thing is it seems counterintuitive to have to leave a space where you have been applying a lot of effort, let's say in your work, and now I'm coming home and you're saying as a form of self-care I must now apply effort again in another form of maybe work or some activity. And so the idea, like, I think many people are like, I don't want to apply effort. I just want to relax. I just want to rest. But the reality is, oftentimes those forms of rest that we resort to are not restful.
Well, yeah, and I would say that would be talking about something completely different. That's rest.
Mm.
Not
So would you
necessarily.
not define rest as self care?
Not necessarily. So
Okay.
rest might be something that occurs in self-care, but self-care is not just rest.
Mm. So rest could be part of self care,
Rest could be
but
part of
not.
self-care. Yeah,
Yeah.
if I'm completely drained and I need sleep,
Yeah.
right? Sure.
Yeah.
But make no mistake, like rest is not the only part of self-care, right? I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I maybe in another life, like go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, because I think that's a big part of what we think self care is. That it's
Yeah.
rest. It's relaxing. Right. That's how I recharge is by just like sighing of relief, like the mani, the pedi, the spa day. It's resting, so it's self care. It's like this is how I recharge by like powering down, so I can cons- conserve and build up back that energy. But you're saying that that's part of it. There's more to it.
I would 100% say there's more to that,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
I agree, man.
Cuz at the end of the day, those things feel good. Rest is important, but and I would argue too that like some of those things we could constitute them as luxuries, right? Like um a
Spa
man,
day.
yeah, spa day. It's like, hey, think of the majority of the people in the
Yeah,
world do not have access to a spa day.
yeah.
Like, I don't even know. I've never been to a spa, like other
Oh,
than
dude, you
for
gotta
like
go
a
to the Korean spas. Have you
hey,
been to those or
no,
heard of
never,
them?
never. I
Dude, so you like pay a fee at the begin you so you can I think there's one up in DC,
okay,
VA. So you pay a fixed fee.
yeah,
As soon as you enter, take off your shoes. They give you like pajamas
wow,
and like you're just in the spa and there's like jacuzzis,
wow.
and there's massages you can go to, there's like saunas and it's like a whole thing. People spend hours
I believe
in
that.
those spas, and it's honestly pretty fun. But
Yeah,
it's 100% a luxury.
yeah, yeah. And see, and I guess that's where. So again, this kind of comes back to this definition of okay, like what is self care? So if I'm defining self care as something that is primarily used to help me be able to return to the work that I have with a greater ability, then part of that has to involve, in my opinion, some dynamic to where my mind is able to focus on purpose and intention. And so I think that in some ways we can't really get away from, and again, we've talked about like purpose and meaning, all this stuff like a bunch before, but I think that in some ways you can't really get away from purpose and meaning in how you recreate or how you take care of yourself. And I think if you do, and again, it's not, I'm not saying like, oh, you can never go to a spa day or oh, like you should never get a pedicure. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that your self care is going to be more effective if you're intentional with it.
Mm, right.
And I think I think that's what a lot of people miss. Or sometimes like what happens is the tool we use for self-care, we end up getting so far into that it turns into something that is either more than that or it's it's distorted in some way. So,
Mm,
case in point, so
yeah.
I think
What's an example?
so an example would be honestly, I think this happens a lot in the world of jiu-jitsu,
Hmm.
right? People
Yeah.
get into jiu-jitsu, they love it, and then they compete.
And you're wearing a jiu-jitsu
I
shirt,
am
by the
wearing a
way, right
jiu-jitsu
now.
shirt. Yeah, I
And
am.
full disclosure, both Dale and I probably would say jiu-jitsu is part of our self-care
Yeah,
repertoire routine.
sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, and I would say so anytime there's an inherent ability for to view something competitive, and I would say certain people's proclivity to do so is higher than others for sure. But especially like in this world, I would say you see a lot of people get into it. They get super excited about it. They go all in, get a bunch of gear and then sign up for tournaments. And it's like now all of a sudden, once they have the moment they stop performing how they want to, it becomes much more difficult for them to enjoy it or for it to give back to them.
Mm,
And I would argue that the thing that happens is we start performing instead of transforming.
right. And that performance is what we are, in many ways, a lot of people begin hobbies and self-care to help counter that, but now the hobby has become the source of performance.
Yes. And performance anxiety.
Yeah.
And so now the thing that was designed to provide a greater level of self efficacy, right? A greater degree of being able to decrease stress is now inducing stress. It's really sad in a lot of ways. In some ways, you could argue that like we make an idol of this thing. It just becomes a
Hmm.
new thing that we put in place or something that we now have to be performative with.
Mm.
And I think that's really unfortunate. And full disclosure, like I'm totally guilty of this.
Yeah. No, same.
100%.
Yeah.
Like I I've competed a lot
Yeah.
and
Yeah. You've been doing jujitsu for how many years now?
I guess it's been about 8.
8 years.
Yeah, it'll be 9 in
So a lot
October.
of competitions.
Yeah, and it was more definitely when I was like white belt, blue belt, purple belt, like because I was excited about it, jazzed about it. And again, though, even in those times when I was winning a lot, it's there was still a high degree of stress and performance placed on how I performed.
Hmm.
And I think that's really unfortunate because I think I missed out on many opportunities, which I'm trying to take advantage of more now, but many opportunities just to enjoy something for the sake of doing it.
Yeah. Because I'd be curious to hear like why you even decided to do jujitsu and take it up as a form of self-care, and like
Mm,
what did it give you
yeah. Yeah. So,
initially before you ended up, it
yeah.
ended up leaning too far on that
Yeah, no,
extreme.
that's a great question. And so I guess that goes back to um years ago in grad school.
Yeah.
So I owe it to say this first and foremost. There was there was two people that really impacted my me starting jujitsu in the first place. One was a guy way back in the day I used to work with. He was like, "Hey, you should go try this." And so like I never forgot about him. His name was John. And but then like I wouldn't say that I really like, I had stepped into, like, an MMA gym before and just, like, tried it out, but that I wouldn't consider that as, like, "Oh, I did this because I quickly was like, "Okay, I don't really have time for this," and, like, that was, like, my one test, and I would say it was different in that context. It wasn't like a jiu-jitsu school.
Mm.
When I
S-
went Sorry?
So you weren't watching like MMA. You weren't into like martial
No, I didn't
arts.
I so, when I was a little kid, I did karate,
Okay.
and, like, I liked that, but again, like, it was also kind of and again, I wanna be careful here because I have a lot of respect for all people who train a martial art, and when I say train, I mean, like, really put their efforts into fine-tuning their craft and their technique, but there's a lot of bad martial arts gyms out there, and when I say bad, I mean that, like, they're not actually doing things that I would argue are gonna be effective in a real life scenario, and this was also, like, when I was a kid growing up, like, no one really knew, like, about MMA as much, like, yeah, you had, like, stuff coming up, but it was, like, you didn't have your local school in the YMCA that you could just go to, and you could do all these different things.
Right.
So for me though, as a kid doing karate, I remember I got into karate and like I just wanted to be able to punch and hit people. And so I had this gear on because I was a little boy. I wanted to be aggressive and physical. And I went to this tournament and I distinctly remember I kicked this kid out of the ring twice. Like, and
Oh
when I say
snap!
the ring, it's not like an actual ring. I wasn't
Yeah.
like the Hulk or something. It was literally just a boundaried area, right?
Yeah.
And
And
I like
knocked him out
yeah, outside of the
out of
ring.
the
So
ring. Yeah.
technically speaking, hey, like I was being effective in what I was doing. And I felt bad for the kid too, because he started to cry. His dad was like over there on the sides and was like, "Hey, like get up, get up." And the kid got up and then he hit kind of like got a hit on me on the side of my head. And like I didn't even notice it or feel it. And then the judge was immediately like, "Ah," and raised his hand, and the other kid won the fight. And I was like,
No,
"What?"
he won.
Like, yes. I couldn't believe it.
That was
I was
that
like,
was rigged, man.
like,
That dad paid
well,
their
so
judge.
I mean, it was. I remember feeling so disillusioned. I was like, wait a second, I like
I just kicked
that,
this dude out of the
I
ring.
knocked him down twice, and so like it just made me feel so silly.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had a bad taste in my mouth from that. I was like, but what's the purpose of this now? But anyways, long story short, um, high school, college, I ran a lot, and
Yeah, you were like you told me you almost like you almost ran in college, like
yeah,
varsity
so
type.
yeah, I got some scholarships to run in college
Hmm.
or some offers to run in college, and I didn't end up taking any of those because honestly, like I was tired of running, and it was one of those things that became like so pivotal for me that I weighed a lot of things on. I didn't really want that anymore, and I didn't want the stress. Like there was a lot of other pieces going on, and it started to how I performed started to cause more stress for me than what it gave. And I didn't know how to be able to adequately turn that around to suit me and to serve me.
Got you.
And I would say that's because again, I want to be careful here because I think that college scholarships are great for sports. I think it's
Hmm.
super awesome opportunity. For me at that point in life, it wasn't something that I think would have benefited me to continue.
Mm,
Also because I didn't really have moorings as far as what I wanted out of life. And so it I think it would have largely left me in a place of just, you know, dis-ease rather. But back to the jujitsu side of things, ended up, long story short, ended up going to grad school, and my buddy Eugene Kelly had essentially was like, "Hey, you need to come to this jujitsu gym." And I went to the gym, and I remember like it was like I was like, "Okay, this is different." Like wasn't like anything I had experienced before, like at any other place. And so,
hmm.
and I remember the first role that I had. I don't I don't necessarily remember the exact person, but I remember the next person, and it was a good buddy of mine, also a guy I consider my coach, Stephen Kyneth. Like he was like, "Hey man, you look like you're ready to go. Let's go ahead and go." And like I tried to just like I don't even remember what I tried to do, but he just destroyed me like in so many ways and like over and over again repeatedly.
Hmm.
And it was great. I loved it. Like
Being destroyed.
I loved being destroyed because effectively it was like I could and granted I was very spazzy, which
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
isn't
which
the
is
best
like
thing, which is
typical
which is
white belt
typical, yeah,
behavior.
typical white belt behavior.
Like you're
This
just panicking and
yeah,
flailing, trying
a-
to survive.
and but it was so gratifying. Like so gratifying. I remember getting home and told my wife she was like, "Hey, how was it?" And I was like, "It was great. I got choked out a bunch."
I'm going
Yeah,
back.
I'm going back. And so like I started going back, started training and like I was training a lot. And then again, I think this is where I think if you're not careful, it starts to shift on you. After my first, I think I was spoiled because it was like I won my first competition, right? And so, and that's like as a white belt. So it's not, doesn't
Mhm,
really mean anything,
mhm,
but you get this feeling that you have a standard here now, a placeholder. And so, and I knew what it was like to win in other sports. And so I held this idea here in front of me like, okay, I have to excel in this. And I forgot that the reason that I did it to begin with was because it felt good and it helped me think clearer. And after I was done, I was able to have a better internal locus of control or just a calmer state of mind. And so I was more pleasant to be around with other people and especially my wife.
mm,
And
mm.
so that was relevant.
Yeah, and that was that was what the benefits of like this is helping
Those were the real
me
benefits.
engage better with the world.
Yeah. And I remember the first time and I would say too, like my wife will tell you any time that I've had to cut weight for a competition, she's hated me. And ultimately because like and again, I want to be careful
Mhm.
here too because I'm not a professional jiu-jitsu athlete. It's not something I was trying to do for the purpose of my job. It was not my career.
It was your
It was
hobby,
my hobby
and it's always been your
and
hobby.
has always been my hobby. Now, granted, to a certain degree, like, okay, I have a gym, I coach,
Mhm.
but it's not, still not my primary source or my primary method for income in that sense. Like it is a what I would call a an attempt to give back and an attempt to be able to keep jujitsu in my life. So those are the primary modes for it.
Yeah, I think that what you're sharing is really important because hobbies in many way are what we use as forms of self-care, and the what makes a hobby interesting is that, like you said, it requires effort. So if we're talking about a martial art, it could be gardening, it could be fishing, it could be um I know you've engaged in knitting. Do
Yes.
you still knit?
No, well, I don't know. So I start like my wife got on this crocheting kick a
Oh,
few months,
crocheting, yeah,
and
crocheting
so I
power.
I decided to learn how to crochet,
Hmm.
and that was super fun.
Yeah,
Crocheted a blanket.
yeah,
It was neat.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but then I was like, okay, like I made a big blanket for the family, and then I was done.
Oh, you're the, I'm
Yeah, I'm,
yeah,
I'm I, like
I'm good.
I don't have like
Not
a
gonna pick this thing up.
yeah
Yeah,
not anymore. I got
yeah,
too many irons in the fire, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, like crocheting, right? So it's like usually at times, I guess it could be reading too, right? But there's some sort of like active participation that at times will engage your creative juices. Like probably either you're solving a problem, you're learning a skill, you're I don't know trying to catch a fish. Is that I guess that's solving a problem.
oh man, fishing is one of those things. Like I could have a whole nother podcast on that. As far as like
Yeah, yeah, because you fished,
oh
you
man,
fly
I
fish.
yeah, I like I'm kind of a nut for that, and that's one of those things like I will lose time inside of. Like if I go out on the water, like it's I have to put timers on so that I remember what time it is or something like that because I will just lose myself in what I'm
And then
doing. Yeah. Now,
wow.
granted, I would say jujitsu is like that too, but because I do it so frequently, I'm used to having to dial back and check time and that sort of things. And obviously, life still calls.
Mhm.
So, but with fishing, it's always been one of those things for me that I've refused to ever utilize it or have it be something that I do for money or try to teach for compensation in some way
Yeah, why is that?
because I don't want to ruin it for me. And the reality is that like it is in some ways like it's too precious like that's just the like and granted too, like it also involves other things. Like not to say that like I couldn't do that because arguably you could ask the question, well, why'd you do that with jujitsu? Did you ruin it for yourself? And it's like, well, I mean, to some degree, yeah,
It's definitely more. There's a higher vulnerability for it to not.
yeah.
Yeah, there's vulnerabilities there.
So I think one thing that's different with jujitsu is that jujitsu is highly social, right?
Yes.
And so there's multiple ways that I think you could argue that a sport like that, or rather an activity like that, can give back to you. So that if you are engaging in it in a certain way, you have multiple avenues from which it can give back to you, in which you can give to it, right?
Hmm.
As in, give something to the participants, right? But with fishing, it's highly individualized. And also, yes, you might fish with one other person, but again, like there's some different aspects there. It's not like you're fishing with 8 people at a time and that you call that enjoyable, right, all the time. Most of the time, if I wanna go fishing, I want to be by myself or with one other person tops.
Tops.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
that's it, and it's like, 'cause it is literally a time for me to get lost, like, that is me turning on my phone effectively, like,
Mm,
or going out into the wilderness, like,
hmm. And how does that benefit you compared to jujitsu? Like, how does it transform or allow you to come back to reality? How does fishing do
I would
that for you?
so I would say that again, this is an intentional piece because I mean, I've definitely come back from fishing trips and just not been happy and been miserable because I either didn't catch what I wanted to or A, B, C, or D, you fill in the blank. And so
Hmm.
then my wife is like, why did you even go?
Yeah.
Right.
What
And
was the
so,
point?
yeah. So, I mean, you have to be careful with that too. But I would say that fishing for me is more like the spa.
Got you.
Fishing is the
Yeah.
spa or the
Yeah.
pedicure,
Yeah.
right?
It's more restful.
It's more restful,
Yeah.
100% more restful, more like I will forget to eat because I'm just so engrossed in the activity, and it's just so like it's immediate sugar all the time, the whole time that I'm out there. It's great. Now, as far as my ability to come back and be a better person after that, like unless I'm being really intentional with fishing and trying to pull out some other metaphorical pieces, like, and I would say that's possible, but say towards, okay, like, and I'm gonna go from a spiritual side here, like my relationship with God, right?
Hmm.
Which I would say you can be reminded of greatly in nature.
Hmm.
Like, unless I'm being intentional in that way, it's not going to give back to me in the same way.
Mm.
Whereas with jujitsu, you're constantly dealing with people. And I would say there's a lot of opportunities for you to reflect on how you either treated someone else, treated yourself, or were intentional, or had the opportunity to be creative.
Yeah.
And I think those parts are huge.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think one of the things that sticks out to me when you share that is when we apply high stakes to that hobby, that's when it becomes dangerous. Like, in order for because then it becomes performative, right? It's like, okay, now I need this to in order to make income and to survive, or I need this in order to prove that I can perform at this level, and if I don't, then I'm terrible, whatever. Then now we have provided too many stakes on it. Versus I feel like inherently hobbies are kind of low stakes. Like whether I lost or won the comp, I'm not doing it necessarily because of that. I'm doing it because the process of being involved in this hobby in jiu-jitsu, for example, is what allows me to maybe, I'm taking from your, so by the way, Dale did his thesis on jiu-jitsu as a form of self-care, right? Is that,
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
yeah, your master's thesis?
Yep.
So like, talking about some of the things people derive, like confidence, sense of community, and it's like all that stuff that like when you go back to your normal life, it helps you. And so that is, I think, important to note when you're choosing a form of self care, that be careful about the stakes that you place on it. Otherwise, it could be twisted to not serve the main purpose of self care, which is to help you rejuvenate, be refreshed, so you can get back to what you're doing life for.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a really important point. And that's that self-care, I would say, in today's day and age has become largely selfish.
Mm. That's interesting because a lot of people, some people in some circles, and this is in religious circles, some people will say self-care is selfish. Like you shouldn't do self-care because it's inherently selfish.
Well, maybe if you maybe if you define it that way, I would
Yeah.
say, but inherently, like, what is self-care?
Yeah.
We're making it overcomplicated.
Yeah.
Literally, you're caring for yourself, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
like that's not like you have to do that to some degree,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
okay,
Okay.
now
Mm-hmm.
to what degree? All right, well now that's highly different.
Mm.
So if we're only if we're only doing this for the purpose of caring for ourselves with no other indirect or direct attention towards what it can provide in other contexts, I think that has a greater probability of being unhelpful.
Mm. So that's how you're saying it has become selfish in
Yes.
many
So,
ways.
like, if I go to the spa and I feel like really relaxed at the end of the day, then I come home and something just like triggers me off and I'm just like, lose my cool. Well, what good was the spa? If I go fishing and then I come home and I'm still thinking about fishing and I'm not able to be present with my family, which by the way has totally happened,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not really beneficial at that point.
Mm.
It's not really helping me help other people. Maybe I feel okay, but now I'm not going to feel okay because now my family is going to be dysregulated. Like my wife's going to be mad at me. And so it's like, oh, well, shoot, I guess I need to go fishing again right now. It's, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like, if the medicine does not actually help the problem, well, then what good is the medicine?
Mm.
And I would say, to kind of harken back to that, like you brought up the thesis,
Yeah.
the thesis that I did, and I would say that there were several things, right, that impacted that I think is not alone. Like jujitsu alone doesn't impact these things. There's other activities and hobbies people can do that still, I would argue, you could find these things in, but in particular, like some of the main things that came out in that study were confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and that was defined by someone's increased comfort with their self concept and their inherent ability towards physical and emotional self advocacy,
Mm.
right? So the next one was community, in
Mm-hmm.
that their connection with other people became increased in the
Yeah.
sense of practical applications and fostering new relationships, because you meet lots of different people on the mats. Like you could have people that
Oh
are
yeah.
professionals, you got to have people like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
I've
Like,
never, like, I don't know where else I'd meet the people that I meet at jiu-jitsu. Policemen, firefighters, doctors, nurses. I mean, name it.
sure. It's like there's so many different types of people. And then the the concept of learning, so essentially being able to see self-improvements emotionally and cognitively. And then so this is going to be a tricky one. So mental health, right? But that was defined as the self-determined level of efficacy in maintaining a desired mental state. And I think this one is key, because if when I come home for fishing, for example, and I meet all these disturbances, my ability to maintain the desired state
Mm.
doesn't exist to the same frequency or level.
Mm.
Whereas if I've
Gotcha.
just exerted myself on the mats and like had a lot of different opportunities, had good things, had bad things, and I come home and I recognize my ability to be able to self regulate in spite
Tolerate,
of, yes,
self-regulate. Yeah.
if that's increased, that's great, right? That's what that purpose is
That's why
for
you
then.
did that.
That's why you
That's
did
why you
that
did
thing,
it.
right? And so exercise is the first one that comes to mind that many people use for self care, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
However,
very effective
yeah, very effective
for
tool.
mood regulation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
However, again, if we're not careful, exercise can literally be centered around performance and egotism,
Yeah.
Instagram reels,
Mm-hmm.
publishing selfie. Like
Yeah.
it's, it literally becomes useless in terms of making yourself an actual better person.
Mm. So you said confidence,
Community,
community,
learning.
learning, and mental health.
Yes, the last one that was noted in that study was honestly, like, I kind of I don't wanna say I hate this word, but I feel
Okay.
like it's so grossly overused, and that's mindfulness.
Okay. Okay.
Eh
We should have an episode on mindfulness.
yeah, but essentially, how it was defined in this study was the awareness towards the present moment experience without judgment or expectation.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, and again, that could be used as a common, uh, common way to define that. But essentially, you are able to be in the moment
Right.
without future tripping
Mm-hmm.
or being preoccupied about the past.
Past. Yeah.
And I think one way that we can become or get out of the moment is by thinking about, like, I think competing when we place high stakes on things, or rather, and maybe it's just in the gym. If this person beats me, I can't let them beat me. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
now you are future tripping. Now you are not staying in the moment of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Mm-hmm.
now lost already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you are able to be content in the moment and stay in the moment and enjoy what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
that's now you're good.
Mm, mm. Right, because then it helps you take that same skill and apply it in other areas of
Exactly.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, like, you could summarize this whole study in jiu-jitsu showed people how to be comfortable with discomfort.
Right. Right. So, so are you saying that whether it's jujitsu or not, if that form of self care can, or it's several, it might not come from the same place,
Sure.
but if we have a basket of activities that give us confidence, help us develop confidence,
Sure.
community, learning,
Mhm.
mental health, and mindfulness,
Sure.
that this, at least from your study, it found that these were helpful indicators that this is self-care that's effective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious though, because I've
Hmm.
obviously I've said a lot of stuff here,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you also you have a pretty significant history with competing in swimming.
Yes.
Did that start for you as
Self-care.
self-care?
No. So it was,
Okay.
yeah, I started swimming when I was like 10, 11.
Okay.
So my elementary school, we had PE and
Mm.
then we had swimming.
Okay.
Like swimming was separate from PE.
Okay.
And so because of that, like there was a high caliber of swimmers in our school, because it's like this is a whole separate thing. And then we'd be in swimming competitions, and so I finally got a good education on the strokes. And as soon as I learned that, I was pretty high performing from age of 12 up till like end of high school. You know,
Didn't you, like, represent Kenya or something? And
yeah, so I got to swim. Yeah, so initially I got to swim for Uganda because I lived in Uganda at the time, but then I'm Kenyan by nationality. So I got to, yeah, represent Kenya like within Africa, different like inter national competitions, and then at the Youth Olympics in Singapore 2010.
wow.
So yeah, so it was a big deal for me. That was like my life, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
did
again, it was always competition.
did you enjoy it though?
I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it, but when I stopped swimming competitively, when I entered college, because basically, long story short, I couldn't get on the University of Michigan team because at the time they were like the top men's swimming team in the country. Like their
Mm.
qualifying times were
Well, okay,
Olympic
so you said
times.
you couldn't get on the team, but what was the margin? What was the margin of seconds that you were like,
I mean, I was like a second off from like the
which, okay,
qualifying times,
a
which is
second
like
in swimming
huge.
is a lot, but, like, a second to most people is like you were off by a
Yeah,
second,
but
like
yeah, well, maybe 2 seconds on some events. But basically, when I sent my times to the coach, he's like, "Dude, you're not gonna keep up with our training. Like, you need to go get these times."
Mm,
And those times are Olympic qualifying times.
mm,
And so you're like 18 years old, and they're like, "You need to make Olympic qualifying times
man,
to be on the University of Michigan team."
wow.
And Michael Phelps swam for
Mm,
U of M at some
mhm.
point. So I did what all other swimmers do, is we get on the rowing team. Like all swimmers who can't make the swim team, they do rowing. So I did crew for like a semester, and then I got a back injury.
Ooh.
And it's funny because in many of so with swimming and rowing, a lot of what drove my enjoyment was the sense of competition, was
Mm,
the goal, something to aim towards and to work towards.
mm,
And it really benefited me in many other areas of life. Now, when I tried to just like swim for the sake of swimming and fitness, and
mm.
dude, I hated it. I can't do it. I can't swim now because I need that structure. I need
That's how I
that
feel with
goal.
running. I don't
Oh, with running?
yeah.
Yeah.
Now
You
granted,
guys can't just run.
well, so I can.
Yeah.
Like, I always used to like, I could like, I was always someone that could go out and run, like, and do but when I ran, I was like, "I'm not going to stop until I hit this distance or until I do this time." Now, sometimes I could lose myself in that,
Hmm.
but it became to the point to where it was, like, very performative.
Yeah.
And arguably, maybe if I employ some good techniques into learning how to enjoy it again, I could. And if it was the only resource that I had, sure, but it's not.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So, yeah. So at some point, like, because I got injured, I stopped rowing. And then ended up like I just like go to the gym, do like little workouts there. Um, and then I play soccer. I loved soccer. Soccer's been like that constant self care for me. I just haven't been consistent with it because I know I'm not the next Messi, right? Like I've never thought I'd be the next best soccer player, but I can enjoy a game where we're like kind of high stakes ish, like that that great community, meet people, we play, we get exhausted, come back home, we're great. And then I started jiu-jitsu
Mm. What drove you to that?
recently.
I'm curious. Like, what drove you to that?
Well, again,
Well, I mean, recent. You've been training a year and a half
year and a
now.
half, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I never had done martial arts, was never into martial arts. But I met a buddy, our mutual friend, and he had told me that jujitsu has been highly beneficial for.
The jujitsu prophet.
Yeah, he's a jujitsu prophet. You meet him, you know him. So I'm not naming him on the podcast because I
Yeah,
don't know if
fair
he wants to
enough.
be named.
Yeah.
But so he had told me, it's basically he sells jujitsu, and he approached it from the angle that I don't know whether he knew this or not, but he approached it from the angle that is the only angle that I would open myself up to. And he's telling me how like jujitsu helped him with his PTSD and like help him be more be comfortable with being in a violent situation where you're
Mm,
under a lot of stress
mm,
because you're getting choked out. Like like you're literally if you don't tap, person will choke you out. You're gonna pass out, right? But the fact that he had the option to opt out made all the difference because now it's like I can subject myself to high levels of stress and my body is like you're responding to it, yet you realize you still have agency in that moment to either tap, or as you progress in the art form, in the discipline, you now realize that, okay, actually I don't have to tap, I can pause, I can think through how do I get myself out of this choke, how do I counter sweep, etc. And so it said he's allowed him to calm down under stress essentially.
mm.
And I was like, dude, what are you saying, man? Like I've never heard of this before. And of course, as a counselor, like the mental health, that's like mental health, right? We were talking about right there.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'll try. I'll try the first. I'll go to a class, try it out. It's free usually, like first week or whatever. I loved it. Obsessed.
Mm.
Like same thing. Came home, I was like, I got joked out, but I'm going back, right? And so and so yeah, as a result, and again, like for me with jujitsu, is like I love that I have the ability to compete because I still like that level of like
Intensity.
goal oriented,
Sure.
but I know it's not the end of the world. Like this is not my life. Like
Yeah.
if I don't compete, if I lose, if I win, it's whatever. I can just go back home and I have my wife, I have my job, or like whatever. and that's why I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you brought up a really good point there, and I think that's where we talked about this some, I don't know, episodes back, but when you start identifying your value, I think it was in the judgment episode we talked about
Mm-hmm.
this, like, but when your value
Mm.
becomes identified and solely adopted in the context of what you do, right?
Mm.
Now are you're performing to such a degree that if your performance does not go how you want, now your value all of a sudden is decreased. But that isn't, I would say that's not actually living by values.
Mm-hmm.
You're living by a goal and you're
Mm-hmm.
defining yourself by a goal actually,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is very unhealthy. Arguably because at some point you're going to fail.
Yeah.
Now,
And what happens when you fail?
exactly. And one could argue, well, what about those people that become the best in the world? They actually achieve the one thing. It's like, okay, they did that in one area, but what happens when they stop that thing?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone does at some point.
Right. When the athlete retires at age of 30 and realizes they have 30 more years
Yeah.
of life left.
And there's going to be all these other areas that they have not devoted themselves to, increase their ability to thrive in, because everything has been, and I would argue to be a top athlete, you actually have to be selfish.
Mm.
And this in many ways goes against the notion of self-care truly, because I think to be a top athlete, you have to be selfish
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
in the sense that you have to think your training comes first before
Yeah.
relationships,
Right.
before any other endeavor.
Yes.
Any other thing that you do or want to do
Mm-hmm.
must come second or third or fourth.
Yeah. It's very hard to not do that
Yes.
as an athlete.
Yes. Well, no. And
Yeah.
to be fair, like you are not going to excel or succeed to the same degree if you do not put yourself first there. You're just not, like, statistically speaking, like it's a simple mathematical equation.
Put in the hours.
Exactly. Now, this is where I would say this becomes relevant, and it's still on the topic of self-care, but I think that this is where it gets really tricky because I think a lot of times people start things because they enjoy it and because like it keeps them in this place, but also because they just learn how to survive in that mode. Right. So they learn how to exist in this place of constantly doing this thing.
Mm.
And the unfortunate thing that can happen is when they lose that, now their purpose is jolted significantly. I love this quote, though,
Mm-hmm.
by Pablo Picasso, actually. He
Okay.
said, "The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away."
Ooh.
Now, in talking about self-care, right, I would say, like, I believe that that has a lot of truth to it because if I believe that my purpose ultimately is to give back to other people, then what I do in self-care is going to help me do that or should help meet that end,
Mm.
ideally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where
Mm.
I think that's relevant.
Yeah. No, the meaning of life is to find your gift,
Mhm.
and the purpose of life is to give it away. Ooh, that's good. Yeah, that's so one thing that stuck out to me as you shared is how our self-care also can be integrated into your not just your hobbies but your job, your life, right? Because at some point it doesn't matter how many hobbies you're involved in if, for example, in your main job, in your main um the way you approach life in general
Mhm.
is not helping you live out your values and what's important to you,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, a very simple thing would be like in my job, if I just have trouble saying no to people, I'm just a yes man, right? Yes man, yes man, yes man. So I go home, I have my jujitsu, I have my self-care habits. But if I go back to work, I'm just yes, yes man, yes man, yes man. To a certain extent, how much is your self-care helping you if you still lack the principles to allow you to carry your responsibilities in a way that allows you to still give effectively? Because essentially when you're a yes person, you're a yes man, like you're spread so thin, and so everything that you give to only gets a little bit, never gets quality. And so everything, yeah, it's basically you're not able to help effectively. So in that sense also, I think self-care is about learning to carry your responsibilities in an effective way. Or in other words, what are the values that guide how you approach your life? And that's self-care.
Mhm.
And centering yourselves on those values. Because it's one thing to say, hey, this is what's important to me. Like, I value honesty, I value integrity, I value maybe having boundaries and all these things. But if we look at your life, at your calendar, how you spend your day, how you make decisions, oftentimes what we say is important to us versus what is actually how we live our lives, there's a big gap. It's just like, what do we do about that? For me personally, a big form of my self-care is going back to like Judeo-Christian perspective is I have to prioritize my spiritual practice of being able to reflect and assess to what extent do my values reflected in how I carry out my life, and also to help ground myself in those values, right? So whether that's like reading a scripture or like some other literature, like engaging in a prayer practice or journaling or talking to someone and gaining perspective from another person, like gaining wisdom and mentorship, that that's all form of self-care for me because it allows me to ground myself in values that allow me to carry my responsibilities effectively.
I think that's a great point because ultimately it's interesting. We've talked again about this guy a lot before, but Viktor Frankl, his primary mode of meaning, right? I
Hmm.
would say the thing that underpinned his belief in how it was constructed was responsibility.
Mm,
And so even in self-care, and this is where I would say that what we miss is, like I said earlier, self-care has become selfish because
hmm.
it's lacked intentional responsibility.
Yeah, yeah.
When we allow responsibility to still exist within how we take care of ourselves,
Hmm.
we now innumerably increase our ability to have intentional, effective interactions with ourselves and with other people.
Mm,
We can fill up our proverbial tank.
yeah.
Now, on on that note, harkening back to that notion of recreation, right?
Mm,
I think I think that's why it's really important to distinguish or rather define it as recreating, right? Because whether that's from a mental concept or whether that's from a physical concept, it's an important practice. You have to constantly reassess, reevaluate. But in that same vein, I love this quote by Miguel de Cervantes. He says, "The
okay.
bow cannot always stand bent, nor can human frailty subsist without some lawful recreation."
Mm,
But he uses
I like
the
that imagery.
yeah, exactly. Well, he uses this notion to say some lawful recreation, right?
Okay.
Almost to insist that no, this is something that needs to happen, right?
Mm,
It's something within the bounds and constraints of some type of order and process that benefits this piece. And I would say that's kind of what goes back to the notion of what you were describing around responsibility, right? Okay, so when I take care of myself, am I being responsible with how I do that?
mm,
Is this going to then pay back dividends that I need to exist in the rest of my life?
mm, lawful recreation. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's similar to I think it's Henry Nouwen. So
Right.
he's like a theologian, psychologist. Like he's like the one religious figure that I see most quoted in like counseling
Oh, really? Okay.
curriculums,
Yeah.
right? Especially with addiction and things like that.
Mhm.
But he spoke of this idea, and I think he was writing to, because he was a priest, and he was writing to other priests and religious workers, and he talks about the ministry of absence.
Mm.
And so he's like, yeah, when you're doing your responsibilities, when you're out there, when you're present with your family, present with your congregation or present with the people that you're serving, whether it's your clients or customers. You're engaging in the ministry of presence, of service, of being there and actually serving them. But he's like, your ministry of presence is dependent on the ministry of absence, because we often think that in order to take time away to engage in self-care and to like withdraw from this is like it's not going to help. Like, how can I, if I take time away but I need to be there to serve, right? How can I leave the people that I'm serving? But that ministry of absence is the very thing that allows you to fill your tank so that you don't pour from an empty cup, right? You can't give what you don't have. And so the ministry of absence is critical, the lawful recreation, so that you can fill up your tank and be able to give from a place of fullness rather than you're just like running on empty. And everyone knows, man, people can tell when you're running on empty. Like, we can all tell, guys. Right? And it's important. Self-care is important for the sake of returning and living fully in service to our purpose and what we do. Yeah.
I love that. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess in summation, I'd say that modern self-care is overrated.
Okay.
Practical, responsible self-care is not. It's not done enough of.
It doesn't always feel good, or
It
it's not
doesn't-
intuitive.
And I would say that it's the responsibility of good self-care is not to feel good.
Yeah.
The responsibility of good self-care is to give back and to help you be able to give back to you and to others.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, I think it feels good down the line. Like,
Yes.
maybe there's a deep contentment that comes
exactly. And I would argue that it's just like the values question, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's something that can happen as a byproduct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that it's bad for self-care to feel good.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But the intention is not
To feel good.
to feel good.
Right. I love it.
Good stuff.
Love it. Oh,
I think we hit it.
I think we hit it.